The morning of Saturday, May 1st, 1915, was a busy one at New York's Chelsea Piers. The sweltering heat wave that had gripped the city from April 25th to April 29th had finally broken. Temperatures had plunged from a stifling 92 degrees Fahrenheit to only a brisk 59 degrees Fahrenheit, or 33 degrees Celsius to 15 degrees Celsius, bringing a much welcome sense of relief to those within the city. The air that morning was mild and damp, the sky blanketed by heavy clouds as on and off rain showers drifted across the city. This sudden shift in weather eased the burden on travelers making their way to Cunard Pier number 54. No longer forced to carry their heavy coats, they can now wear them comfortably, freeing their arms for carrying their baggage and trunks through the pier itself. Beyond the pier, Cunard's pride, the ocean greyhound Lusitania, loomed over the wharf, her towering black and gray funnels cutting through the morning mist. To those gathered inside the terminal waiting to board, she appeared almost mythic, a sheer wall of black steel studded with rows of rivets and portholes stretching seemingly forever. All across the city, passengers stirred about in their hotel rooms. After checking out, they trickled into taxicabs or boarded complimentary shuttles, making their way down to the docks. At Pier 54, a steady stream of cabs arrived curbside. Muscular porters in open jackets and bowler caps worked quickly, hauling heavy trunks and luggage with practiced ease. Outside the terminal, a motion picture camera had been set up to capture the scene. One by one, passengers emerged from their taxis and stepped into the frame. Men in fedoras or boater hats with long overcoats. Women in flowing gowns and elaborate hats adorned with silk flowers. And the children bundled tightly against the chill. As always, the Lusitania's passenger list featured its share of high society, and their arrivals drew the attention of crowds gathered along the wharf. Families, well-wishers, reporters, and curious spectators lined the pier. Cunard had even erected viewing stands, a tradition for major sailings, and they were absolutely packed. From the grandstands, onlookers could admire not just the ship, but sweeping views of Lower Manhattan, the sprawling docks of the Hudson River, and the distant piers of Hoboken, housing various detained vessels of the North German Lloyd Line and the Hamburg America Line. But today, of course, all eyes were on the Lusitania, especially after the unsettling message that was published that very morning in the newspapers. The infamous warning, issued by the German embassy, read, "Notice, travelers intending to embark on the Atlantic voyage are reminded that a state of war exists between Germany and her allies and Great Britain and her allies, that the zone of war includes the waters adjacent to the British Isles, that, in accordance with the formal notice given by the Imperial German government, vessels flying the flag of Great Britain or any of her allies are liable to destruction in those waters, and that the travelers sailing in the war zone on the ships of Great Britain or her allies do so at their own risk." Among many of the well-known individuals boarding the Lusitania was Alfred Vanderbilt, heir to the Vanderbilt fortune and one of the wealthiest men in the United States. Despite the printed warning in the papers, Vanderbilt and his wife reportedly laughed it off. That same morning, he received a rather eerie telegram that read, "The Lusitania is doomed. Do not sail on her." It was signed simply Morte, the Italian word for death. When asked about it by reporters, Vanderbilt simply dismissed it as somebody trying to have a little bit of fun at my expense. Still, those close to him noted a certain anxiety in his demeanor that morning. He wasn't the only passenger to receive that ominous message. It is believed that this message was likely sent to well-known passengers intending to board the Lusitania from the German embassy in Washington, D.C. Also among the notable travelers was theatrical impresario Charles Frohman, author, philosopher, and Roycroft founder Elbert Hubbard, traveling with his wife Alice, and George Kessler, the international wine magnate known as the Champagne King. By 9:30 a.m., an announcement echoed through the ship. Anyone not sailing must go ashore. One by one, the last goodbyes were said, and family members filed back down the gangway into the pier. The atmosphere on the pier and on board the Lusitania had changed. It was part excitement and part unease. A grand ship was preparing to cross an ocean at war, and everyone, whether passenger or bystander, seemed to feel the weight of it. The Lusitania had been scheduled to depart Pier 54 for Liverpool at 10 a.m. that morning. However, that hour came and went, and the ship remained at the pier. News quickly spread throughout the Cunard terminal and aboard the Lusitania that her departure had been delayed by 2 hours to allow for 41 passengers from the anchor liner Cameronia to transfer aboard. The reason for this being that the British Admiralty at the very last possible moment had requisitioned the Cameronia to become a troop transport. Initially, the anchor line agents, which were now scrambling, planned to rebook the passengers onto their flagship, the Transylvania, which was scheduled to depart May 7th. But the Cunard Line, which owned the anchor line, decided that it would be far more convenient to move the passengers onto the Lusitania that morning instead, much to the inconvenience of both the Lusitania's passengers and the Cameronia's passengers. Many of the passengers aboard the Lusitania were thoroughly disappointed by this delay. Family members who had disembarked earlier were now permitted to return aboard for one final farewell, and many travelers went below to dine in the saloons while they waited. One by one, taxicabs, paid for by the Cunard Line, arrived at the pier, and the Cameronia's 41 passengers slowly trickled aboard. Finally, just after 11:30 a.m., the all-ashore gongs rang out across the ship. Visitors, mostly family members, reluctantly disembarked as departure time neared. Shortly after, the light rain ceased and breaks in the cloud cover revealed occasional sunshine. Inside the pier, dockyard workers began retracting the gangways. A booming voice from a dock worker with a brass megaphone echoed through the terminal. No more passengers will be permitted aboard the Lusitania. But just as it seemed the ship might finally depart at noon, another delay occurred. This time, Captain Turner bore some responsibility. His niece, actress Mercedes Desmour, had come aboard for a brief visit. The night prior, Captain Turner had visited her backstage at the New Amsterdam Theatre, where she was performing in Henry Arthur Jones' play, The Lie. On May 1st, Desmour had come aboard to say goodbye to Turner. After the Cameronia passengers had finished boarding, dockyard workers removed the gangway, unaware that Desmour was still on board. Turner was furious when he learned this, and at his very insistence, the gangway was hastily reinstalled so that she could disembark. This incident delayed the departure by nearly 20 more minutes. One passenger, English architect Oliver Bernard, later criticized the event. Captain Turner, he wrote, neglected his duty at the wharf in New York at a time when the vessel should have been sailing, by having a relative on board. It would be this seemingly small delay that would ultimately seal the Lusitania's fate 7 days later. With the rain cleared, motion picture cameramen positioned themselves atop the Chelsea Piers for a grandstand view of the ship's decks, capturing hundreds of passengers waiting for departure. Finally, just after 12:10 p.m., the mooring lines were loosened from the bollards and several tugboats stood by to assist. Cameramen resumed filming as the Lusitania remained momentarily still, her passengers lining the railings with much excitement. A young sailor climbed the stairwell to the docking bridge, a narrow platform near the ship's stern. On the ship's port side, he raised a white flag into the breeze, then crossed to the starboard side and raised its twin. These paired white flags were a silent but unmistakable signal. The Lusitania was ready to depart. Less than 10 minutes later, the ship gave a gentle shudder as her 4 turbines began to come alive. The Lusitania's deep whistle sounded 3 long blasts over the course of 45 seconds, signaling her departure. As her propellers began to slowly turn in reverse, sediment stirred from the bottom of the pier, muddying the waters as she eased backwards from Pier 54. The cameramen continued filming. One jokingly called down to the passengers, "We are going to call this picture the Lusitania's Last Voyage." The remark was met with laughter aboard the ship, and this was in fact captured on film. It was 12:20 p.m. The Lusitania was finally departing. Passengers waved to loved ones on the pier, some waving handkerchiefs or small flags provided before boarding. Others tossed handfuls of confetti into the air. The departure of a great ocean liner was always a festive occasion, and none more so than this, for one of the world's largest and fastest ships. On the port side of the boat deck, the ship's band struck up a popular tune, "It's a Long Way to Tipperary." At the same time, several members of the Royal Gwent male voice singers from Wales, returning home after touring North America, began singing the Star-Spangled Banner, drawing warm applause from the American passengers on board. At the bow, under an officer's supervision, crew members secured mooring lines and stowed equipment. Near them, a sailor monitored the ship's motion as tugboats approached. As the vessel backed out and gradually picked up speed, the bridge passed by the camera lens, capturing Captain Turner on the starboard bridge wing, overseeing his ship's departure. Once the Lusitania had fully reversed into the Hudson River, 2 tugboats nudged at her bows southwards, angling her downstream towards the sea. Slowly she began moving under her own power as the engine telegraph rang out, "Slow ahead." The cameraman atop the pier captured the final shots of the ship as she slipped out of view. The rain began to fall again, and one by one, the passengers on the deck of the Lusitania retreated inside, followed by the cameramen. As the Lusitania proceeded downriver, Captain Turner kept her speed deliberately low. The Hudson teemed with vessels of every size, liners, freighters, ferries, lighters, and tugs, all adjusting their courses to make way of the monumental Lusitania. Along the New Jersey shore to starboard lay the vast railroad wharves of the Erie Peninsula and New Jersey Central lines. On the Manhattan side, the ship passed a series of piers whose names embody the scale and diversity of transatlantic and coastal travel. Such piers, of which these lines owned, included the White Star Line, the CGT Line, Albany Line, People's Line, Old Dominion Line, Fall River Line, and the Providence Line. Signs of the ongoing war were impossible to miss. Near the Hoboken docks, the German liner Vaterland, one of the largest passenger ships in the world, lay moored in limbo. Larger than the Lusitania, the Vaterland had sought refuge in New York Harbor on the very first day of the war to avoid capture. She was not alone. Over 20 other German liners were also interned at the Hoboken piers. As the Lusitania reached New York Bay, where the Hudson and Easter rivers converge, the waters widened and deepened. She passed familiar landmarks. To starboard, Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty. To port, Governor's Island, Brooklyn's Red Hook, and the breakwater of Erie Basin. In the distance loomed the Black Tom wharves, then a major munitions depot. Before the war would end, however, it would be destroyed in a mysterious explosion. Below decks, stewards and the ship's purser were conducting a routine stowaway inspection. With wartime tension hanging thick in the air, the search was more rigorous than usual. To their surprise, 3 men were discovered and quickly detained. They only spoke German, and one was found carrying a camera. The discovery was immediately reported to Staff Captain Anderson. Although the men admitted to be German nationals, their true intentions remained murky. Some later speculated that they were attempting to photograph evidence that the Lusitania was secretly armed or carrying munitions. The 3 men were confined in a third-class cabin converted to be a makeshift brig. They were intended to be handed over to British authorities upon arrival in Liverpool. This incident was kept quiet, and the passengers aboard the ship were not informed. As the ship cleared the mouth of the Hudson, the Lusitania's 202nd transatlantic crossing had officially begun. Once beyond American territorial waters, Captain Turner ordered the engines to increase speed, but stopped short of full throttle. There was no need to burn excess coal just yet, as protocol dictated that the ship would soon have to come to a complete stop. The wind picked up as the Lusitania entered the open Atlantic. The air grew noticeably cooler, sharpened by the ship's forward motion in the absence of land. A few passengers remained on deck, watching the American coastline fade into the haze. But most had gone inside to settle into their cabins and unpack. Ahead, vague ships began to form through the fog and mist. 3 British warships. Their mission was to ensure that the Vaterland and other enemy vessels remained confined within New York Harbor. Turner gave the order, full astern, and the Lusitania forcibly came to a halt. 2 of the vessels, the HMS Bristol and the HMS Essex, were Royal Naval cruisers. The third was more familiar, the Caronia, once a proud Cunard liner like the Lusitania, now refitted for wartime service as an armed merchant cruiser. Turner had once commanded her himself. The cruisers took position off the Lusitania's starboard side with the Coronia off her port. Each floated roughly 800 feet away from the Lusitania. Small boats were lowered from all three ships, through what Captain James Bissett of the Coronia later described as swirling mist veils. Sailors rowed steadily towards the Lusitania. Their cargo was not troops or supplies, but rather outboard mail, letters and documents bound for England. Once the mail had been transferred and the rowboats made their return, Captain Turner finally gave the signal, full ahead. The Lusitania surged into motion. Her immense propellers churned the sea, sending up a towering wake, while the ship's foghorn blasted 3 long, low notes as a farewell to the harbor. But even as she accelerated, the Lusitania was still not moving at full speed. The war had altered everything, even in ways that passengers would never notice. To cut costs during the downturn in travel, Cunard had ordered Turner to operate the voyage on just 3 of the ship's 4 boiler rooms. This saved 1,600 tons of coal, but it came at a cost. The Lusitania's top speed was reduced from 25 to 21 knots. On paper, the difference seemed minimal. But in reality, however, it meant that crossing would take nearly an extra full day. There was no official announcement, and most passengers seemed unaware of this change. As the Lusitania began her departure, a cameraman aboard the Coronia snapped a series of photographs of the ship. The final image captured of her sailing into the horizon, her smoke trailing from only 3 of her 4 funnels. It would become one of the last photographs of the Lusitania in motion. Aboard the ship, passengers began to settle into their new surroundings. Those in their cabins unpacked their belongings, making themselves comfortable. Others wandered the decks, exploring the vessel or striking up conversations with fellow travelers eager to get to know their shipboard companions. Yet, there was one conversation that dominated the discussions: submarines. Few believed that Lusitania, packed with passengers, could ever fall victim to a torpedo attack. But the warning that had appeared in the newspapers, the one that hinted at the risks of traveling on a ship like the Lusitania, gave many pause. It sparked plenty of gossip, but no one could have possibly anticipated what would unfold in the coming days. The first night at sea passed quietly. An informal dinner was held in keeping with tradition aboard such ships. Many passengers, still wary with the day's events, from going through customs to the boarding process and then finally settling in, retired early to their cabins that night, marking a peaceful end to an otherwise busy first day aboard the Lusitania.